Well, so when you click share screen, there's a little tick box that says share audio. Share computer sound, that one?
Yeah.
Click that, then do it.
Have you got it now?
Mm-hmm.
You've got the picture?
Yep.
And you're getting audio as well?
Well, it hasn't started yet. Do you want to start it?
Well, I would start with a commentary.
Well, I've got your audio, but let's try the audio on the PowerPoint. Yep, that's working. So I've got to fetch my kids now. So do you want to just go ahead and record it? It's set to record, so you can just do your presentation.
Okay, then I just bring the full PowerPoint screen up.
Yep. Do you want to do that? Let me just check it's working. So if you just maximize it, play the sound again. It's yep. Maximized on my side. Maybe try playing the sound again. Let's just check it's working. Yep. Press play.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. That's working all right. Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, if you could just go ahead and record it, I'll leave it recording. So,
okay.
On my end, it will just keep recording. And when I get back in about an hour, I'll just stop recording.
Okay. Well, it was supposed to be for 25 minutes, but anyway.
Well, no, I mean, you take as long as you need, and what I'll do, I'll edit it afterwards to cut off any.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Thanks very much. Sorry about this.
It's all right. Don't worry.
So it's just running. Okay.
Yep.
Well, you see from the title, turning just 3 500-year-old facts into a full biography of Leicester's greatest composer, Hugh Aston, born about 1485, died in 1558. This is a very condensed version. Those who are members of the Leicestershire Archaeological and Historical Society will be getting about 12,000 words, bringing together all of the more than 10 years research I've been doing to try and find out who is Hugh Aston and what was going on about him. And let's start with just a little bit of his music to give us some idea of what it's all about. Sorry, Parmdeep, it's not, the PowerPoint isn't progressing in with the click on the screen itself. So what I'm going to have to do is to bring up each screen up separately. So I'm now going to screen 2. Here you've got, as I said, there are just 3 facts about Aston that are undisputed. First of all, he wrote some enormous amount of probably of very spectacular music, although only a very tiny proportion survives. Probably 95%, 98% of all of the pre-Reformation music was destroyed or has been lost. We got on the screen here indication of what the actual music scores look like. But this is a surviving piece, which is in the Royal Music Collection, now in the British Library. And clearly, if you wanted to take this home and give it to sorry, give it to your local church choir, they would be slightly foxed by this. But an extraordinary scholar called Nick Sandon has spent about 30 years of research with music of this period, going through the old manuscripts, transcribing them into modern notation, making performing editions of these. And over the years, Nick's done about 200, including virtually all of the surviving Hugh Aston pieces. And if you want, your choir wants to buy them and see how whether they can take this on, all of these are now published and available through the Royal School of Church Music online shop. But yes, another clip of these choral works and so on. Give you a little, just another taste. Most of the surviving music seems to have been written by Aston during the time that he was at the Newark College, which I'll say a little bit more about. There are written in 5 or 6 parts. Altogether, surviving, there are 3 completely traditional masses, plus 7 or so vocally very challenging 5-part antiphons, which you see on the screen there. And interestingly enough, he wrote a version of the Te Deum Laudamus, but using his own text, Te Matrem Dei Laudamus, we praise the Mother of God. And that again, it represents this tradition of a very strong series of works and performances which were specifically related to the Virgin Mary. And in fact, the original foundation of the College of the Newark, College and Hospital of the Newark, in the 14th century, put the praise and recording of recognition of the Virgin Mary right at the center of the charter itself. And as I said, the predominance of these themes relating to Mary, the Marian themes, almost certainly reflect Aston's long association with the Newark College. In addition, the piece with a typical Aston composition, a sort of what's known bass ostinato, almost looking towards the counterpoint of 2 centuries later. This was one work known as Hugh Aston's Ground, was widely copied by perhaps a dozen composers, most notably William Byrd, who produced a piece for the organ known as Hugh Aston's Masque. Moving on to the Newark itself, the Royal College, Choral College and Hospital of the Newark had Aston was there as what was described as master of the choristers and keepers of the organ, organs plural. Sorry, the organs. Let's start this again. Aston recorded sorry, let's start again. The Royal College Hospital and Hospital of the Newark, Leicester, in its records, notes and describes Aston as, quotes, master of the choristers and keeper of the organs. Note the organs are plural. And in the bishop's visitation of 1525, and also the year later, when Cardinal Wolsey, the most powerful and richest cleric in the country, tried to recruit Aston to go to Oxford to head up the music for Wolsey's new Cardinal College, as he called it. Now, the College of the sorry, start again. Now Christchurch College and the Oxford Cathedral in the centre of Oxford. The picture shows a reconstruction of the Newark College site in about 1500, which was prepared in about 10 years ago by the Leicester University Archaeological Service, based on some survey work they've been doing. You can notice there the gateway, the major gateway of the Newark, nowadays generally known as the Magazine Gateway. Just pointing this out now. Next to it was the South Gate of Leicester, which was demolished. Much less grand structure than the Newark Gateway. And in this corner here was the house of Hugh Aston. Belonged to the college, but they made this available for him. And also, we found out recently, he had a lot of land that went with this. So that's that corner there of what was known as Hangman's Lane, now Oxford Street, and Millstone Lane. within the site, each of the 12 canons and the dean had their own house, and the canons all had to look after some clerks, some religious clerks, ordained clerks, and also some of the choir boys. But it's a little bit of that, those survive. This section here, which I'm marking now, was part of the men's hospital, and it is that still does survive and is now used by De Montfort University. The rest, most of the site was demolished in the 1560s or so. Moving on now, we do actually very recently have found an image which shows the grounds of the college and also the church. This is here. It's a very strange thing. In a manuscript copy of the made in the 14th century of the history of England of Geoffrey of Monmouth, in the British Library, under the page which refers to Leicester and the story of King Lear, which it adds, there is a little panorama drawn looking from the east to the west of the different parts of the town. I haven't got all of them on there, but you have here St. Mary de Castro, St. Nicholas, which then had a spire, and this cluster here is actually the church of the college. These various buildings are showing the bits and pieces diagrammatically there, including the river and the watermill. So we do actually now have an image of what it all looked like. I became involved in about in the middle of 2008, when we realized that from the reference books that Hugh Aston, who was associated with Leicester, although we didn't know much about how or what, that he had been buried in St. Margaret's Church on the 17th of November 1558. And Canon Barry Naylor, who was the vicar at the time, organized a memorial service in the church with some of Aston's music, some of the plain song Sarum Rite music of the period, and various other contributions. The main picture shows the church exterior. There's a very nice watercolor of the church interior in the 19th century, which is very much as Aston would have known it. It was his own parish church, St. Margaret's, and there's also surviving the bottom there, the sculpture of Abbot Penny, who was the great abbot of the Leicester Abbey, built the huge wall around it and so on. And you find his initials, JP, built in the brickwork. And he died in about 1535 or 40. So Aston would have known this memorial effigy in there. There's no memorial to Aston himself or any information about where he was buried. The one part of the Newark College which survives is the hospital wing, and which is now used as administration by De Montfort University. It does have a little chapel of about 1420 or 1430, which was used to serve for services for the 100 men who were living in the chapel as for medical care or as paupers. And on the night before the anniversary service in St. Margaret's, we had an event in there where there was I gave a talk about Aston, and we had again some of his music, group of 6 singers singing some of the major choral works, and the choir of Holy Cross Priory in Leicester singing the plain song of Sarenraet, which went with that. As a result of that, de Montfort woke up to the fact that they had this very famous person who was associated with them for 25 or 30 years at least. And so in 2010, when they built their new splendid new business school, law school, the building with the startling green cladding on the outside, on Oxford Street, opposite Oxford Street, we had a program there of music by Aston and some of the Sarenraet plain song. A small group of us from the Holy Cross Priory choir again formed that. The third fact. First, of course, was his burial. It was the music and the relationship to the college. Second was the burial. The third one that we had fairly good evidence of was that Hugh Aston graduated with the Bachelor of Music at Oxford on the 27th November 1510. There's a lot of information in the Oxford University records there. When he applied for permission to take the examination, he stated that he studied in the music school for 7 years. He was a student, but not a scholar. He was not a poor scholar, so he was being sponsored in some way. And as the students of the day were usually admitted at the age of about 14, from this we can calculate Aston's date of birth as around 1485. For his examination, he gave a lecture. Those examinations were entirely oral. A lecture on the musical theory of Boethius, and he also performed a mass and a related antiphon that he'd written for the occasion. The examiners were obviously very impressed with this because they ordered that the proctors, those are the university disciplinary officers supervising the exam, should retain the manuscripts of the music for the university. That original one we think probably doesn't survive, but the Bodleian Library has a manuscript copy of around 1520 of a 5-part Te Deum Mass by Aston, and also an antiphon Te Matrem Dei Laudamus, linked to the theme of the Te Deum, which were probably the examination compositions. It's very, very good copy, which was made, as I said, probably about 10 years later, and perhaps it was either in the music school or possibly even at the college. Moving on, the other thing that we got from was what have I got to here? Yeah, sorry, flip Mr. Slide there. One of the biggest research breakthroughs I had was finding that Aston had been admitted as a freeman of Leicester during the year 1516, 1517. The civic year, the borough at that time, ran from November to October. So, and he was fairly well down the list. So it's pretty clear that he would have been admitted in 1517. Unfortunately, there's a big gap in the otherwise fairly complete records of the Freemen of Leicester. But the original registers and so on have been missing for hundreds of years. But the admission of a freeman was extremely important to the borough. It enabled the borough to identify who was or who was not allowed to exercise his trade or profession in the town. It also gave freemen a share of the land and property of the freemen's commons and so on. But secondly, in terms of the civic responsibility, if you were made a freeman, you knew that you will be liable to be called upon to assist with the administration of the town, possibly for the rest of your life. The record of Aston is in a very short list in the borough records, obviously intended for that purpose, a single line. But from that, you can work out that he was admitted by patrimony, in other words, descent from a father who was a freeman, who eventually, I went through all the various records, and I think it must have been Robert Aston, who represented the south ward of the town, which was represented by Aston's family and descendants for at least 5 generations, probably 6 generations, through into the 17th century. It does, though, however, very interestingly, describe Aston as a gentleman. Now, in fact, we know from the family connection, he was not actually titled or a gentleman in the normal sense, but shortly before his death, Richard III had set up the College of Heralds with the purpose of establishing the claims, validity or otherwise, of claims for titles, for the grant of coats of arms and so on. And primarily, the way you got this through descent from being a respectable family, or possibly becoming a very rich person and so on, rather like being put in the House of Lords today. But there was a third category of gentlemen, and that is people who are university graduates. And it's not generally known today that if you've got a few £1,000s, if you're a university graduate, you can apply to the College of Heralds and have a coat of arms and so on set up. The point here is that in 50 years of records, Aston was the only one ever identified as gentleman. And that, I think, is a very interesting connection, because the various other speculation about who he was. And I think that link to the fact that he was a university graduate is a very powerful one indeed. In terms of his year of admission, I think 1517, this was presumably when he returned to his hometown to take up his job at Newark College, the Newark College. What's interesting there, it's a long story to go into, but after a long period when his college had not been doing very well, they appointed a new and reforming dean who reformed various parts of it. And one suspects that he brought Aston in to take over the music at the same time. I won't go into it here, but there is quite strong possibility that Aston was originally learned his skill as a young chorister at the college, and he may well have been sponsored to go to Cambridge for his degree by the college as well. In which case, that makes another point that the new dean will be very keen to get a very promising young man they'd started off in there and knew the traditions and so on of the college. I said that Aston, as a freeman, could be called upon to take part in the running of the town. The first, there were two categories of freemen or called to civic office. The borough was run by what was known as the 48, which was 4 people appointed, not elected, from each of the 12 wards of the council. And then by the 24, which was 2 from each one, later known as aldermen. The first stage, being called to join the 48, was a fairly light commitment. You had to attend a monthly meeting of the council one evening, followed by a dinner. When you were called to be promoted to the 24, that was a much more serious operation, because the 24 between them carried out all of the functions of the borough. At that time, they did not employ any administrative staff. So you can see there that every year, all the way from his admission as a member of this 24 in 1532, right through to his death in 1558, every year he held one or more civic functions. These were not very heavy duties. The town was very small. It only had about 10 and 11,000 population. Even being mayor for a year, which Aston did in 41, 42, was not a terrible burden. The mayor received an allowance from the borough for his general expenses. And if there was something very special, then additional funds would be available. The big event of Aston's year as mayor was a visit by the new Lord Privy Seal and various other nobles who came for several days. And the king himself gave them 2 deer, venison, as part of the feast and so on. So the mayor and the corporation didn't have to pay for that. Anyway, that was the thing. The interesting thing, one of the interesting things there is that in 1555, he was a member of the Parliament, which was a very important Parliament, actually. It was the 4th Parliament of Queen Mary, the first of Philip and Mary together. And it did, in fact, carry out major reforms, particularly in local administration. Also, very topically, it was considering the problem of poaching of fish by foreign boats. It also ratified various laws that were being prepared to reverse the Protestantization of the country and to re-establish the Catholic faith. As well as his choral pieces, Aston was very well known as a great expert on pushing forward the composition of keyboard music. Although only 3 small compositions survive in the British Library, they're all 3 written for the virginals, but they could be played on other keyboards. Let me put a music sample up again. when I started looking at the working on Aston, I think the very last thing I was ever expected to be getting mixed up with was finding out about the sexual life of the king and King of France and the King of England. But this was this these three keyboard compositions are very interesting. They're both in the same manuscript book. I won't go into all three of them, but one of them was a domp, which is a courtly dance, which Aston had dedicated to Lady Carey. I then went running off to try and find out who Lady Carey was, and Lady Winfield, who was also mentioned there. And I suddenly discovered that Lady Carey at that time was known as what we nowadays know as the other Boleyn girl, Mary Boleyn, the elder sister of Queen Anne Boleyn. What happened there was that while she was still in early teens, really, Mary Boleyn was in the court in France for 3 years, and she was quickly taken up as the mistress of King Francis. She returned to England when she was probably about 17 or 18, and she immediately became part of the entourage, the ladies looking after Queen Catherine, who was living largely separately from Henry VIII at that time. In 1521, the kings of England and France met in English occupied part of northern France for 5 days for an enormous festival, which became known as the Field of Cloth of Gold. And it was while it was there, Mary Boleyn and Anne Boleyn actually both went across as part of 24 ladies looking after Queen Catherine. While she was there, King Francis obviously spotted and recognized her, and he told Henry that she was the worst whore in the whole of Christendom. This obviously aroused interest in Henry, and when he came back to England, he very soon took her up, and she became Henry VIII's mistress, having already been the King of France's mistress. This produced all sorts of problems because she was obviously in the very close entourage of Queen Catherine. So the king found a sort of local follower of his called William Carey, gave him a knighthood. They had laid on a massive wedding attended by the king at Greenwich Palace. And so Mary Boleyn was married to Carey and became known as Lady Carey. Later on, Carey died, and after a few years, she married again. But one of the things here is that the dates that Mary Boleyn was called Lady Carey, and also the dates of Lady Winfield, enable us to tie down the composition of these keyboard pieces to somewhere between 1520 and 1525. Moving on, what did Aston do at the college? Well, he did very well, actually. He had the same salary as the dean, rose to £12 a year, plus substantial free accommodation and generous other terms with very little work to do, actually. Like the dean, he only had to appear at major feasts as a minimum. And in fact, the daily music and teaching of the choristers with the responsibility of 12 ordained choral vicars, 6 lay clerks, and 6 choristers. So alongside his various business undertakings, which I'll mention later, farming, and also his work for the corporation, he was allowed to undertake paid consultancy or other work, and he worked over, I think, 7 or 8 major other religious houses across the Midlands. The exact terms in which he did that are not very well known, although in the case of St Mary's College in Warwick, he was certainly engaged to help them build the first organ, which is one of his own specialities. What is extraordinary is that when he retired, he received a state pension for life of his last full salary of £12 a year, and that these in total came to almost 2/3 of that sum, £6, 13 shillings and 4pence, in respect of his loss of office, I suppose, in relation to these other places where he was working. His compositions during the period of he was at Newark College, most of them fall in that category. Probably the keyboard works, and certainly nearly all of the choral works. The exception is the mass and antiphon produced for the Oxford examination. The works are all very, very challenging indeed. Very few choirs, even at the highest professional standard, could take on these without at least a massive amount of specialist practice and so on. Even in the modern performance scores that Nick Sandon has produced over the decades. The most successful performers of these is probably the America's Finest Renaissance Chamber Choir, Blue Heron, directed by Scott Metcalf. And if we ever get possibility of traveling across the Atlantic again, the arrangement, this plan is that I will do a 2 evening performances with Blue Heron, them singing the samples and me doing the introductory talks and lectures. See how, there we are. This is the start of the Ave Maria Ancilla Trinitatis. Hail Mary, the handmaiden of the Holy Trinity. And this is from a recording by Blue Heron, who won a major international Grammy Award for this recording. it's about, the whole piece is about 14 minutes, so I only played 2 minutes there. But that Ave Maria Ancilla Trinitatis is one of the pieces by Aston that was sung in the 450th anniversary events, the birthday concert in the de Montfort and also in St. Margaret's. I've got in the full text, which those who will read the Archaeological Society transactions will see, it's been published later this month. I must have got at least turned that original 3 points to over 100 and to 12,000 pages and 50 footnotes. But one of the other most interesting things that turned up that I found were 2 unpublished deeds in the Leicester Borough records, which relate to Aston's retirement from the college and also his residence and so on. This show that he retired on the 1st of October, 1546. It would generally assume that he worked at the college to its suppression at Easter Sunday in 1549, but didn't. He retired before that. The deed was very puzzling to start off with. It had all the standard forms of a deed, of a lease, in effect. The only thing it was missing was it didn't have a starting date. The starting date was to be from the death of Aston, and it was recognizing that for the rest of his life he would have all his premises free, and then on his death his widow could rent them from the college for a nominal 10 shillings and 6pence a year for 20 years. Now, of course, with the college, when the college was suppressed, the ownership of the property passed to the Duchy of Lancaster, and the property did pass to his widow, and then in about 1570, it was assigned. The Duchy authorized the signing of the lease to his eldest son, Robert, who by that time was also a freeman, and I discovered recently was the first schoolmaster of the grammar school, which was built in Leicester by the corporation. And that continued through several generations certainly into the beginning of the 17th century in the family. The other thing that was startling was what the property related to. He had a messuage, it's called, a house with its outbuildings and services and so on, plus a large garden, it was called. And then adjacent to this was another garden just outside the South Gate in Millstone Lane. And the total area can be calculated because the property boundaries were still there and identifiable on the first large-scale accurate plan of Leicester surveyed in about 1612. And so what you got there is he had in effect what we call a market garden or a small farm. He was actually obviously in business as a farmer, perhaps not surprisingly, because as a freeman, he would have the use of land on the Freeman's Common and also extensive grazing rights for livestock. And because of that, the property also included, just a little bit further up Horsefair Street, a barn and barnyard. This is presumably where he would bring livestock, pigs, cattle, whatever it might be, sheep, into the property into the barn for the winter. So altogether, this shows that Aston must have been operating a small farm. In fact, later on, in one of the later records in the borough, this is described as a farm, small farm. Moving on, in the final years, Aston remained very active within the town. We've seen the very long list of offices that he held every year for over a quarter of a century. Particularly interesting, as I mentioned before briefly, he was sent to London as a member of Parliament for the fourth and Mary and Philip's first Parliament in 1555, which, among other things, confirmed Mary's re-establishment of the Catholic religion and practices. Then, at the annual meeting of the corporation on the 7th of November 1558, he was elected once again as alderman. By that stage, he was in advancing years, he was over 70, but he must presumably have been in perfectly good health at that time. Otherwise, they wouldn't have elected him for a year. In fact, one or two cases where people were elected who were not well, this was noted in the borough records. Within days, however, he was dead. Of course, he was buried less than 2 weeks later. Now, there was a great deal of what was called plague around at the time. I mentioned the note there, Cardinal Pole and the chief advisor of the Queen and the Queen herself both died on the same day in the first week of November. What was it? The general view, it certainly wasn't a bubonic plague as is normally expected. The general view is it was probably some form of virus, whether influenza or perhaps it was even a coronavirus, we never know. But Aston was then buried, given all the funeral rites in accordance with the Catholic tradition with which he'd been so familiar throughout his life. So we can end with another one of his antiphons. Right, thank you.